Welcome back to another episode of Day1Radio right here on Live Hip Hop Daily. I'm your gracious co-host Maurice Garland, and I'm always joined by my man Brandon Peters. What's going on with you, man?
What's good, bro? We are just, while we're recording this, we're a couple days separated from what would have been Dr. King's 92nd birthday. And it's ironic that there's a ton of, movies and documentaries that have been rolling out in 2021, which is great, especially considering the time that we're in. One of the most interesting ones and probably hard-hitting ones is MLK FBI, and we have the pleasure of sitting down with the documentary's director today, Emmy Award-winning, Oscar-nominated director and producer, Mr. Sam Pollard. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure, Brandon.
Yes. Let's jump right into it. I mean, you've done a ton of things. You did one of my favorite docs, When the Levees Broke. Worked on Eyes Prize, a bunch of stuff for Discovery Channels, worked on Four Little Girls, a lot of hard-hitting things. And I thought it was interesting at the end of MLK FBI, you guys asked, I believe his name is David Sparrow, what is his ultimate responsibility when covering things with Dr. King? And I thought that was one of the questions that I wanted to know from you, considering it doesn't say in your bio, but I'm gonna go ahead and call you a historian. What's the ultimate responsibility when tackling something like this? Especially, there's a lot of sensitive subjects that are touched in MLK FBI, which we'll get into.
Well, it was David Garrow who was a historian I asked that question of. And, Brandon, the responsibility I feel as a documentary filmmaker is to try to tell what I call an engaging, dramatic narrative of a true event, and to look at our characters, our real people, from as well-rounded a perspective as possible. I wasn't trying to show Dr. King as the iconic deity that he has become. I was trying to show him as a man who had a lot on his plate, and he didn't walk on water. And here he was, thrown into the spotlight in 1955-56 with the Montgomery bus boycott, and made the titular leader of the burgeoning civil rights movement. Took on that mantle, and it was a nonviolent activist who basically was saying to America, it's time now for America to look at Black people as more than just people on the fringes of American society, not as second-class citizens, but as first-class citizens like everyone else, And we no longer need to be in the shadows, so to speak. And so he basically said, I want to break the back of segregation in the South and de facto segregation in the North. And, him and his associates, from C.T. Vivian to Y.T. Walker to Dorothy Cotton to Ralph Abernathy, started this long journey, Andy Young started this long journey going from southern city to southern city, from Montgomery to Birmingham, from Birmingham to Albany, then even deciding they need to try to, challenge de facto segregation in the North by going to Chicago. And, we see the trials and tribulations of the civil rights movement, some victories, some failures, and then the seminal speech that we all grew up with, I Have a Dream, at the March on Washington. And as the film opens up with A. Philip Randolph saying, here's the moral leader of our movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that's what he was, But at the same time as he was ascending and the civil rights movement was making an inroads, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI and one of his close associates, William Sullivan, saw him as the most dangerous Negro in America, as Clarence Jones said. And being a dangerous Negro, even though he was a nonviolent dangerous Negro, he had to be, he had to be dismantled. He had to be, brought down. So, J. Edgar Hoover got Bobby Kennedy to approve the wiretapping of Dr. King and his associates, Clarence Jones, Stanley Levy, and others, basically first trying to connect Dr. King as being flirting with the Communist Party with his relationship with this gentleman named Stanley Levinson, who had been a former member.
We're going to get into that for sure.
Yeah. Like, leave some stuff for the people to watch. You know what I'm saying? It's like some people, but I'm glad that you brought that up because with King being a nonviolent activist at the time, you fast forward to now, that's still the case. Some of the most nonviolent people get looked at as the most dangerous. I mean, Kaepernick didn't do nothing but take a knee on an NFL football field, and he's looked at the same way. So to piggyback off of that, I want to know your thoughts. Like, why do you think now was a great time for this, or is a great time for this film to be coming out? Because, I mean, we like to say that time is the best teacher, but, as we can see, it's not the best teacher for everybody. Some people still don't learn anything from history, but it's like, why do you think now is such a good time for this film to come out and not earlier or not later? Because, I mean, with some of the things that you're covering, not everybody would have been ready to see these parts of the FBI or Martin Luther King's life 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think it just comes with time. I mean, we started this film 2.5 years ago, and we didn't know. I mean, we didn't quite know what was going to be happening in America in 2020, that we were going to have this raging pandemic, that we're going to have the murders of people like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, that the Black Lives Matter movement would be rising up, not only in America, but around the world, And the other thing that's interesting, too, is that some of the things that we focus on and deal with in the film, you hear those same kind of things in America today. So, for example, there's a segment in the film when the white woman asks Dr. King, "Don't you feel your peaceful protests are causing riots in the cities?" Then we hear the same dialogue from Trump with the Black Lives Matters protests. "Don't you think they're causing riots in the cities?"
Yep.
I mean, the idea that, they were trying to say that King is being influenced by the Communist Party, the communist scourge is going to destroy American democracy. Didn't we hear Trump say, if you let these socialist Democrats get elected, they're going to go into our suburbs and destroy our communities? I mean, it's the same dog whistles. You would think that, the American, as you said, Maurice, America would sort of understand the past and not want to repeat it. But obviously they don't listen to the past, and they constantly repeat it, Yeah. So it's timely because America is at such a reckoning now with who they are and what they want to be. And this film speaks to that same period in American history where they had to figure out who they are and what they want to be in terms of how they want to deal with Black people.
So with a documentary like this, I mean, the story is not necessarily new. There's a lot of new information being presented, but I'm curious, like, when you're taking on something like this, like, where does your research begin? Does it begin with the stuff that's already out in the open? Does it begin with trying to break in a safe and find new things? Does it begin with talking to family members and confidants? Like, where does the research begin for such a large undertaking with so much of it already being out there?
The research began first with reading David Garrow's book. My producer, Benedict, had read David Garrow's book about MLK and the FBI. And he said, "You should read this book. I think we found our next film." Because we had just finished a documentary about the search for these two iconic blues musicians in 1964, Son House and Skip James, at the height of the, Mississippi movement. And so I read the book also, and I called up Ben and I said, "You're right, this is a book." And I knew David Garrow because he had been one of our major consultants when we did Eyes on the Prize too. So we reached out to David Garrow, took an option on the book, went to Pittsburgh where he lives, got a camera crew to go with us to his house. And we sat down with him for 4 hours so he could talk about all the stuff that was in that book. And then we read other books. I read a book about the FBI. We read a book about COINTELPRO. We reached out to two other people who are historians in the film, Donna Murch and Beverly Gage. Ben got the transcripts from the Freedom of Information Act that was also online. Some of them are heavily redacted. So, you always have to do a tremendous amount of homework and research before you really start going into production on these films, which we did. And then when we were able to get the money, we then hired archival producers to go and look at all that footage, much of it which I had seen before from other shows I've done. But then we always say to these archival producers, see if you can find something or hear something that we haven't heard or seen before. And he did. He found stuff I had never heard or seen before.
Yeah, I mean, the James Earl Ray footage, I don't think any of us had ever seen that before. And even like just the little fun stuff with, the King and his kids, like, frolicking around. I don't think we'd ever seen that before.
Never saw before.
Yeah, so that was pretty awesome.
And even the stuff, Brandon, of King standing with that reporter from Montgomery getting ready to do one of his first interviews.
Yeah.
And he looked all slick with his hat and stuff, I've said, I never saw this before. He says, are we ready? And of course, it's in a few minutes.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff is gold, man. You find that kind of stuff, those kind of outtakes.
It humanizes him.
That's right.
Yeah, it humanizes him. One of the things that I was interested to know, I feel like you probably know more about this period. I've forgotten more than most of us know. Even though King, as you said, came on the scene nationally with the bus boycotts and had done a ton of things for the people for civil rights, why do you think that the March on Washington was the tipping point for the FBI to say, oh, we have to do something about this?
Because all of a sudden, man, they're seeing all these black men and women, A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, John Lewis, Whitney Young, Dr. King, and others, performers like Mahalia Jackson, Peter, Paul and Mary, Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, Harry Belafonte, and then hundreds of thousands of people in the Washington Mall at the Lincoln Memorial, listening to the one of the great orators of all time, basically saying, we want change. That had to scare the out of Hoover, because what is he? He's a stand-in for much of white America at the time. Because what did white America think about black people? They didn't think about us at all. We were just on the fringes. If they saw us, we were maybe working as a maid or a butler or had a shoe shine stand or something.
Right.
They weren't part of the mainstream of America. When they saw us in the culture, what were we doing? We were either, hiding under beds like Willie Best or Mantan or Steppen, or we were working for Mildred Joan Crawford as Butterfly McQueen, or being Vivian Lee's maid in Gone with the Wind, Hattie McDaniels. They didn't, when people were saying to white people, there's racial problems in America, white people were saying to themselves, what racial problems? What racial problems? I was saying to somebody, man, I was watching a movie last Saturday night, old Hollywood movie from 1942 with Alan Ladd. There's a scene where this young white woman was telling her she can't hang out with all these gangster types. You know what she says to him, man?
What?
She says, you can't tell me what to do because, and you remember this phrase, I'm free, white, and 21. That's what people, white person would say, I'm free, I'm white. I can do anything I want.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that old, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Boondocks cartoon series, but, there was an episode where, a black dude tried to start a problem with a white guy. He just thought to himself, oh, I don't have to jump into this with you. I'm white. I'll be okay.
That's right. That's exactly right, man. That was the attitude. And so, for Hoover, this is like an affront. How dare this man basically say, we want to be part of America's mainstream. We don't want to be second-class citizens anymore. What, are these people crazy? Are they crazy? They're happy. So they should be happy being second-class citizens.
For sure. Messing up the status quo as far
exactly. That's exactly was the attitude.
So it's ironic that in 2021, I believe on Dr. King's holiday, a lot of the news outlets were saying that when King passed, his popularity or approval amongst mainstream America was worse than what Trump's is right now. And taking it back to that time, Hoover was looked at as a hero during that time.
It's amazing. King
was looked at as the evil dude that's messing up everything. And
that's right.
It comes to light over time.
It's amazing, man. It's amazing. But when I see these people, man, in the mall on January 6th, man, you know what I think, man? I think, what if Jim Jones told these people to drink the Kool-Aid with the poison? They would all do it. Yeah. They would all do it, man. I mean, this is scary to me, man. And then I was watching this political show on Showtime on Sunday, and when Trump went down to Texas, and they're talking, with a reporter talking to some of these white people, and they're saying it wasn't us who were in front of the attack on the Capitol, it was Antifa. I'm saying, man, oh man, oh man. This country, man, they've lost their minds, man.
It has. With a story like this, which like we've already identified so much history in it, you got a chance to talk to a lot of people that was around back then and even got involved in things later on. Did you run into any kind of, like, I guess I'll call it MLK fatigue, because I mean, these are stories that have, been addressed before and continue to get unlocked. But, you got people that were like, man, I was there, and you might be the 200th person I've talked to about this. I don't have anything new to share. Like, did you run into any fatigue, like on the behalf of any people that you were talking to about this?
I always think that, when you ask Andy Young to talk, he's probably saying, I've been said this stuff over and over again. So when we first reached out to him, we had a hard time getting on his schedule. And I kept thinking, maybe Andy don't want to do it anymore. Maybe he's tired of telling these stories, but he finally came through. And I thought, I've interviewed Andy Young before when I did the Maynard Jackson documentary. And I thought he was good there, but I thought he was really pretty good here. I thought he was surprisingly good. I mean, the only thing that I tried to push him on, as you guys remember, I asked him, do you think, how come do you think James Earl Ray was the only one who assassinated King? And he said, I don't think he did it, and I don't want to talk about it. He wouldn't go any further, But he was pretty open. And Clarence Jones is also, he's a pretty good talker now, It would have been great to get someone like Joseph Lowry, but he was very sick. We had reached out to Reverend Lowry. He was very sick, and C.T. Vivian, who just passed away, would have been really good, But, it's always fascinating to talk to these men. I mean, when doing these films, I've spoken to Jesse a few times, and Jesse's good, he wants to talk about the movement, And I talked to, who is it? I talked to Dave Dennis, who was in SNCC, and Bob Moses, those guys.
Actually, know his son.
You know his son?
Yeah, David Dennis Jr. Yeah, we were co-workers at some point. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
We all know him.
Yeah. Dave Dennis is a great interview, man. When I did 2 Trains, we interviewed him for 2 Trains, but we dealt with Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman in that one. So, the thing that I think that's important for young people to really understand, so they should really, really dig into this history, not only in watching these films, but reading the books, because this history is really a window into, how the hypocrisy of America, man.
Yeah.
The hypocrisy of America. And it's important for our people to understand you gotta walk really carefully in America all the time, man. All the time. Because when people still don't want to understand the systemic racism in this country, that's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. We alluded to it earlier, and we kind of cut you off from telling the whole doc earlier in the conversation. But Stanley Levinson is a name that you brought up, who was a person that the FBI viewed as a communist. He had ties to the Communist Party, became an advisor and an ally to King. Talk a little bit about their relationship and how that, pretty much kicked off a powder keg that changed the whole movement.
When Dr. King was introduced to Levinson, they became very close. He became very, very close to Stanley, and he trusted Stanley immensely. I mean, Stanley helped him write speeches and stuff, advised him, so they were very close. But when the FBI realized this, because, and we don't deal with this in the film, but Stanley had a relationship with these 2 brothers, Morris and Jack Childs, who we called the Solo Brothers. And what was fascinating about those guys is that they had been members of the Communist Party in the 30s and the 40s. They had become disenchanted. They had stepped away from the Communist Party, but then persuaded to go back into the Communist Party as double agents for the FBI. As double agents for the FBI. So they were working both sides of the street. And they had known Stanley Levinson a long time. He had been a member of the Communist Party. So when he had left the party and started to become an associate with King, the Childs brothers had told Hoover about Stanley Levinson that the FBI should be wary of him. That's why they started to monitor Stanley Levinson. And when they did, they passed on that information to Bobby and John Kennedy. And they called King into the White House before the march and basically said to Dr. King, wash your hands of these people who are part of the Communist Party or have been members of the Communist Party who are around the SCLC too much. And it wasn't just Stanley Levinson, Barry Rustin too. Barry Rustin. And King, he said to the Kennedys he was going to disassociate himself from Stanley Levinson, but he never did.
Yeah.
He never did. So, I mean, he was very tricky that way. Stanley and him were really close.
Like the theme of this conversation has been a lot about, just like, the hypocrisy of America and the FBI itself. After doing this documentary and even just like reading a lot of things that you've read, why do you think this institution is still where it's at? Because I mean, we've seen numerous documentaries, books, and all these things laying out how this is one of the most corrupt institutions in the world. Like how is it able to still be standing? Even as recently as in this current administration.
Yeah.
It's like, how is this institution still able to be so strong after years of darts being thrown at them? Like, oh, corrupt, can't be trusted, this, that, and the other.
Listen, man, that's part of the American, mindset. I mean, we, the three of us, and a lot of Black people, we know how this institution's, is a very corrupt institution, and they're monitoring us, and they got informants everywhere, and still doing wiretapping and stuff. But the general mainstream of America, who knows how they feel about the FBI now? I mean, Trump has been so down on the FBI that maybe they're down on the FBI, but who knows? I mean, because the trust for the federal government is at such a low ebb in all of America now. Who knows, man? I don't know how come they're still standing. I mean, even the lack of the fact that they knew about all this stuff that was going to happen at January 6th, and they still messed up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I always have this saying that people don't get assassinated anymore; they assassinate your character now. It seems like with King, they did both.
They tried,
and you dug. They tried exactly. You dug pretty deep into the FBI's wiretaps and how they kind of switched over from wanting to assassinate his character or nab him for his ties to Levinson and all of that stuff with the communist thing to actually trying to use his sex life as a way to
bring him down,
undermine his character. And it's just like, nowadays, TMZ age, all of that stuff, it seems normal. But back then in the 60s, like I was just kind of blown away. Like I had heard the stories, but obviously we've never heard a lot of this information firsthand until now. How crazy is that? Like this had to be a first.
Yeah, but the thing, remember, is that the press didn't grab onto that story like they would do today. I mean, it's amazing. They didn't grab onto it. I mean, today that would be like front page news.
For sure.
But they didn't. They kept out of people's personal lives back then, and that's what irritated Hoover and William Sullivan so much. So that's when they created that letter. Basically supposed to be a Black person saying that we know who you are, we know what you've done, you know what you have to do, intimating that King should kill himself. And then, creating this audio tape or splicing together this audio tape that was supposed to be Dr. King in a compromising situation and sending this all to his wife, man. That's not part of what the FBI is supposed to be doing.
Not at all. Not at all.
Supposedly legally. That's why James Comey said this was one of the darkest chapters in the history of the FBI. Me, I think there's probably other dark chapters.
Oh yeah,
there's a bunch of stuff we don't know about. We'll never know about at all. How was that experience sitting down with Comey? Was he like super forthcoming and easy to get, or was it kind of a tough thing to grab?
He wasn't hard to get, except we ended up just doing an audio interview with him because initially we were going to do one on camera, but then he had to cancel it. I don't know for what reasons. So myself and my producer, we were on the phone with him for about 20, 30 minutes. And he was pretty upfront, But to me, my attitude that Comey brought into the whole notion of the FBI, and he's like, they're the great guys.
Yeah,
of course. The director. So,
why wouldn't he? It works for him.
That's right. Sure. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. For you, I know we ended the doc for the most part talking about King's transition, not only into speaking out against the Vietnam War after being silent for about 18 months, which is something that I remember reading years ago, but I had forgotten about. And then into kind of his switch of pace with the Poor People's Campaign, which scared the hell out of the power.
Everybody.
For sure. You know, speak a little bit about that and how the FBI reacted. And, you know, ultimately, do you think that is what led to his assassination?
I would say this. I would say that, you know, by 67, King's agenda was changing to the degree that, you know, he still was thinking about, you know, changing America. And so for him now, it was not just about the issues of race, which was always going to be there, but it was also about economics, you know. So that's why he wanted to do the Poor People's Campaign, which was going to bring, you know, everybody, blacks and whites, all kinds of people to DC. Now, Lyndon Johnson didn't like that. And then on top of this, all of a sudden, a man who basically had been, Dr. King, who had been very close to Lyndon Johnson in 64 and 65 with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act being passed, you know, the Selma and Pettus Bridge. All of a sudden, Dr. King decides, you know, after, you know, seeing those pictures in Ramparts magazine of these poor children in Vietnam, he has to come out against the war. It took him a while before he did it, because he knew full well that coming out against the war at Riverside Baptist Church on April 4th, 1967, 1 year before his actual assassination on the same day, you know, he was going to break his relationship with the Johnson administration. And he knew that, as we saw, there was pushback from even the civil rights community who felt that Dr. King had lost his way. Why is he all of a sudden, you know, taking his big toe and going into dealing with being against Vietnam? You know, that's not going to hurt them. That's not going to help the movement. It's going to hurt the movement. But King felt he, you know, he had a moral obligation to present those things and say those things. You know, and then the question that you heard me ask is, with all the surveillance of Dr. King, when he was in every city in the country, how come the FBI weren't aware of the fact that there was a man with a long gun, or a couple of men with long guns, who wanted to kill King, and specifically on April 4th, 1968? This doesn't make sense. So either the FBI knew about it and took a blind eye, or they were complicit.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody will somewhere have some files or tapes that will reveal that. Who knows?
For sure. In the words of, to paraphrase Chris Rock, you didn't see nothing because you was doing it.
That's right.
So before we get out of here, and you brought up the tapes and things that we'll learn over time, I believe it's 2027 when I'm sure they'll be heavily redacted, but when these tapes will be released, what do you think, as somebody who's very knowledgeable on the subject, what do you think that you will hear or we will hear? And secondly, how do you think the general public will respond to it?
Well, my response is that I'm not, if the tapes are released, and I'm not interested in any salacious material. I don't care.
Yeah.
What I'm hoping to listen to, if they didn't edit them and not record them, was any conversations that King might have had with Andy Young or Clarence Jones or James Bevel, you know, or Dorothy Cotton or Ralph Abernathy, anybody who was with him when he went to these cities, to talk about strategies. You know, what's going to be our strategy when we go into Birmingham? What's our strategy when we go into Albany? What's our strategy in Selma? You know, how are we going to deal with the upstarts from SNCC like Stokely? You know, how are we going to deal with them? You know, so I'm looking forward to hear if those things exist.
Absolutely. Thank you, man. I appreciate your time. We always like to give a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of game to our listeners. We have a lot of creatives who follow and watch us, and you know, I feel like we're going to get to a point where we're not going to see as many documentaries, because people like yourself, you know, will 20, 30 years from now, you're not going to be doing this still.
There's a new generation, man. There's a new generation.
Okay, so I don't see it. I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine. Like, I want to see more documentaries. So for those out there who want to get into this business, who have great ideas, what advice, what books, what resources would you tell them to look into in order to be able to create?
Well, the first thing is, you know, if you have a subject or a story that you feel passionate about, just figure out you want to make into a film. The next thing is, you know, try to find people who can mentor you and help you, get a leg up in the business. That's what happened for me. And then, there's certain books. There's a great book called Documentary Storytelling, which one could read. There's so many books about documentaries. Go to a bookstore. Go to the film section. There's bunches of books about documentaries, And there's lots of people in all these cities who are making docs or looking to help people get a leg up.
Awesome. Please tell people how they can watch MLK FBI.
You can watch it. It was released on Friday by IFC. You can stream it, on Amazon or YouTube. And in some of these cities around the country, the theaters are open. So you can check your local listings to see what's playing in the theater. I mean, New York theaters are all closed down, but others, I was talking to someone in Atlanta said the theaters open in Atlanta.
We're in Atlanta.
Atlanta is open.
It's wide open. Everything but the churches.
All right.
Yeah. Cool. Mr. Pollard, thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure.
All right. You have a good one.
You too. Take it easy, guys. Bye.
All right. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching Day One Radio. Be sure to follow us at DAY, the #1 radio on all your social media. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review, and also make sure that you go to the legal outlets to watch MLK FBI. Right. Also watch One Night in Miami. Also watch American Skin, which a former guest Simba spoke about a few weeks ago. It's a lot of good films out that we need to support because, as always, if we don't support them now, it's a less chance that our stories will get greenlit and told. So it is our responsibility to financially support with our voices to let people know about these joints. And that's about it, man. See y'all next week with another dope show. Peace.